So, salam everyone. Thanks for joining. Yes, I realized that what we covered last week is quite a heavy topic and probably new for some of you, and so not easy to follow the logic of it. So I'll spend a little bit of time just summarizing what we covered, and then we'll go deeper into some of those concepts today, okay? So we started our philosophical journey introducing two main concepts, really, okay? The concept of imkan and wujub, right? So the contingency and necessity of existence, right? Everything we're focusing on is on existence. And so everything we're talking about, these concepts relate to existence. So we had these two types of entities that we conceptualized, okay? The first was ممكن الوجود بالذات, okay? So a contingent entity by essence, right? Essentially contingent. So this is any entity that can or cannot exist. It's a possibly existing thing. There's nothing about it that requires it must exist or that it must not exist. It's a mumkin, it's a possibility, okay? And basically, if you want examples of that, everything in the entire universe is like that, okay? From pens to balls to human beings to the planet Earth or the sun or galaxies, all of these things, if you look at it individually, ask yourself the question, can there be a world without this thing? Or does it have to exist? Okay, so I'm going to keep using this pen that I have as an example today. Okay, this pen, does it have to exist in this world? Yeah. Can we imagine a world with no pens? Right? Of course we can. A few thousand years ago, there were no pens. They didn't even exist at all, right? And they didn't have to exist. So this is an example of something that can exist, but it doesn't have to exist. Okay, that's what we mean by mumkin. Its essence is like that. That's the nature of its essence. Okay, and basically pretty much everything we find in the whole universe is like that. There's nothing we see in the universe that must exist. Okay. The second concept was wajib al-wujud. Now this is the kind of opposite of that, which is saying that this would be an entity, something that cannot not exist. In other words, it must exist. It is necessary for it to exist. Okay, a necessary being. Now we'll talk a lot more about that today. I didn't really describe, what is it, and why is it necessary? What makes it necessary? What makes it wajib, right? We'll talk much more about that today. So last time we actually spent much more time focusing on this mumkin al-wujud and understanding its characteristics and understanding how it comes into existence, okay? So what we said was that a mumkin, because it doesn't have to exist, then it requires a cause. Something has to make it exist. It needs a cause to exist because it doesn't have that requirement in itself. Right? This pen needs to be brought into existence because otherwise it would just not exist. Right? It needs a cause to exist. So that's one key characteristic of all mumkins. They need a cause to bring them into existence. Okay. And we went into more detail about the kind of steps, like logical steps of getting from something that's just a concept of mumkin, something contingent, all the way to it actually existing, right? And we went through those steps. I don't need to repeat the steps. It's not too important, actually. The key was that it requires something from outside of it to cause it to exist. Okay? That was the key conclusion about it. And so then we built this argument for the existence of God, this cosmological argument from contingency, right? Based on these two concepts, we built this argument that there needs to be at least one wajib al-wujud. Okay, why? Well, because we see that there are mumkinat around us. We see many contingent beings. So we know that they required a cause to bring them into existence. And that already indicates that there must be at least one wajib which brought them all into existence. That was basically it. And then if I want to kind of apply this in more modern framework of looking at physics, remember we said that all of the universe can be explained using the laws of physics, right? So if I have the laws of physics, I can explain how everything in the universe is caused, okay? So then we said, okay, so that's what we learned from science. There's the universe, but then there's the laws of physics. These laws govern how the universe behaves and how it comes into existence and everything. But then our focus became on those laws and apply the same logic. The laws of physics, are they mumkin or are they wajib? Right? And why do we care? Because if we can explain the laws, then we can explain the universe because they govern the universe. So let's go to the laws of physics and let's ask the same question. Are the laws of physics mumkin or are they wajib? And the answer is they are also mumkin. Okay. Why? Because we could have had a universe with no laws. Or there could have been no universe, or there could have been different laws, right? The laws of physics, these mathematical laws, right? There's nothing about them that requires them to exist. They are just like all the other mumkinat. So that's not where we have to stop. We cannot stop there, like Stephen Hawking did. Stop at the laws of physics and say, oh, the laws of physics caused the universe to exist. Doesn't make sense because the laws of physics themselves are also mumkin. So even the laws of physics need wajib al-wujud to bring them into existence. Then when we have the laws of physics in existence, then we can see how the universe follows from there, right? And we can use science to understand how the universe evolved from that Big Bang and how it changes moment to moment. Everything else we can explain using science. But still, you need this wajib al-wujud to bring all of that into existence. Okay? So that's the argument. It's very simple, actually, but very powerful. Very powerful. And from my discussions with people, there's even if you don't agree with it, if you have maybe a different way of thinking about, where all of this came from, this is not an illogical view. It's important. You should feel that this is a very reasonable viewpoint. It's a very strong argument. You should feel very confident about it in any discussion that you have with someone who chooses not to believe in the same thing. Okay? That's important. Lots of times, people who believe in God are made to feel or look like they are naive or illogical or emotional. Absolutely not. This is a very logical and powerful argument using rational logic to argue for this position. And we should feel very confident about that. Okay? Okay. Now, the last point on all of this was that one thing to remember about this mumkin al-wujud is that this need for a cause is not just at the moment when it comes into being. This need is always with it. Right? We said al-haja محفوظة مع الممكن حدوثا وبقاء. This need for cause continues unchanged before, during, and after it exists. Okay, just because it was given existence doesn't change its essence. Its essence, it's still mumkin and still only dependent on existence to come. So that will always be the case. Doesn't change. Okay, so that's another important conclusion that we reached last time. Okay, so I hope that helps to make last session a bit more clear and more simple with a couple of examples as well. Now, today we'll go a bit deeper into some of these ideas and understand them in a bit more granular depth. And we'll spend more time on understanding the wajib al-wujud, because up to now we spent more time thinking about the mumkin and what it needs, what its nature is, what its characteristics are. Now we'll spend a bit more time on the wajib. But first, we'll go into a few more details about the mumkin and this idea we introduced, which was called al-mahiyya. Okay, whatness of things. All right, so let me just skip forward. Let's kind of start afresh and approach this with a clear mind and say this: whenever we're looking at anything, any entity, okay, any entity, there are two key questions which I have here on the right-hand side of this slide. Two key questions that we can ask about any entity. Okay, the first question is it? Is it means, does it exist? Okay, is it in existence? Okay, so it's a question about its being, its existence. And the answer to that question is yes or no. Right? Either something exists or it doesn't exist. It's binary. It's a yes or no. Okay, so that's the fundamental question about whether something exists. So that's the first question. Is it? The second question is, what is it? Okay, what is it? And so here, which by the way is what we call mahiyya. Okay, mahiyya is the answer to this question. Ma huwa. Okay, that's what the mahiyya is. It's the answer to the question, what is this entity? All right. In English, mahiyya is translated as quiddity. Okay, something's quiddity is its mahiyya, and basically it is its definition. It's the set of limits that define what that entity is. Okay, so back to my pen example. Okay, the first question is it? Meaning, does this pen exist? Okay, yes or no? Well, I'm holding it in front of you. I hope you can see it. The answer is yes. Yes, it is. It is. Isness is there. It exists. The second question is then, okay, what is it? And so I can define it. I can say a pen is an instrument made for writing, right? An instrument used for writing. That's the definition of a pen. And if you think about that, that limits the pen to being a certain thing and not other things. I'm sorry. Um, what this tells you is that this is a pen. It is not. It is not a chair. It is not a table. It is not a cat. It is not a house. It's not this. It's not that. It's a set. This is a set of limits to say what it is not in defining what it is. Okay. So that's what I mean. I mean, just think about any entity. If you're going to define what it is, that distinguishes it from everything else. Okay. So two key is it and what is it? So these address the two things that we're going to spend time on, which is being, wujud, and quiddity, which is mahiya. What is it? The concept. All right. So a lot more detail to go into here, but it's fairly easy to understand. I'll just walk you through each one. So let's look at the mahiya in a bit more detail. Okay. So as we said, it is the answer to the question, what is it? It is the definition of any entity. That's what the mahiya is. And if you think about what is a definition is a set of limits and boundaries of existence, right? It's the name and the form of a particular entity. That's what defines it, right? So in Arabic we say al-mahiyat hudud al-wujud. All right, these quiddities are the limits of existence that define a particular thing, right? It defines the boundaries of what this thing is. All right, so that's what mahiya is. And mahiya is always mumkin. Okay, now follow this carefully. When I define what this pen is, okay, I say that it is an instrument that can be used for writing. So that's the basic definition. If I want to give more detail about this particular pen, I can say that this pen is black. It has a black color. It has a plastic clip. It has a metal tip. It has ink inside it. You know, I can give all kinds of details using concepts to define this pen. Okay, but notice one thing very carefully. In that definition, the definition of the pen, I don't include wujud. I don't include existence in the definition. You see? Existence, the question of whether the pen exists or doesn't exist, was the other question, right? It was the question, is it? That's different. That's not mahiya. Mahiya is the definition of the essence of something. And so that definition does not include whether it exists or it doesn't exist. That's not part of the mahiya. Okay? So existence is not part of the quiddity of the contingent entities. All right, so anything that is a mumkin has a mahiya, which is a set of limits, but that doesn't tell you anything about its existence, right? The pen would still be what exists or doesn't exist. Concept of pen, definition of pen, would be unchanged whether the pen exists or it doesn't exist. You following me? It's a pretty simple idea. I'm just separating these two things. There's the definition of the thing, and then separately we can ask the question, okay, but does that object exist or does it not exist? That's different. It's not part of the definition. It's not what makes it a mumkin. Okay? All right, so that's a little bit more detail about the mahiya. The mahiya does not include wujud. All right. Then a little bit more detail about limits in general, okay? These hudud, any kind of limits, okay? So limits, right? Like we said, you know, the limits of this pen, what defines this pen and distinguishes the pen from everything else, okay? they represent the boundaries of this existent, this thing. All right. And limits are always dependent. Okay. They always have some external explanation upon which they depend. Okay. All limits are like that. They always depend on something else. Right? Why is this pen this size or this shape or whatever? There's always some explanation that it depends on to have given it the limit that it has. Okay, so all limits are dependent. Something else has to explain why it has this limit the way that it has it. Okay. So we can bring these ideas together within this sentence here. Every mumkin, every contingent entity has a mahiyya, right? And it's characterized by limits. All mumkinat have limits. Okay? And that's part of what makes them dependent, right? When you have a limit, you are dependent on something on the other side of the limit that creates the boundary. Okay? And all entities that have limits have this general characteristic that they are subject to limitation, decay, destruction, anything that has a limit. Think about this pen. Over time, this pen is going to face anything surrounding it. It might break, it might decay, it might not exist one day, right? It's always vulnerable to everything on the other side of its limit, everything outside of it that can affect it, right? So limits create limitation, they create the possibility of change, decay, and destruction altogether. Okay, so these are general characteristics of limits. This will be very important when we get to the later discussion about the nature of God. We will spend a lot of time talking about limits, okay? So I'm just making some general conclusions and we'll see it applied in different situations later. Okay, so all of that has been about the mumkin and its mahiyya and its limits. All of those are to do with the mumkin al-wujud. Now we shift a bit more towards the wajib al-wujud, okay? And we shift towards wujud itself, existence or being, okay? Being is a very different thing to all other concepts, okay? And in fact, this is at the heart of all of philosophy, and the deepest question of all is the question of what is being, okay? Now, when we study it in philosophy, it's a really interesting kind of paradox, okay? It's like a strange combination. On the one hand, the concept of existence, I've been talking about it for several weeks now, and you guys ask questions about it. Everyone knows what we mean when we say something exists. When I tell you this pen exists, I mean, it is the most obvious concept to us all, okay? It is mafhum badihi. It is self-evident. Everyone knows what we mean when we say something exists. We don't need to use any other concept in order for the concept of wujud to be known, okay? So the concept is very transparent. We know exactly what we mean by existence. But when we think about what is the actual reality of wujud, what is it that makes it exist? That is actually the most mysterious thing. It's the most difficult thing for any human being to understand, okay? And so this quote is a famous one in Islamic philosophy from Mullah Hadi Sabzawari. He says, الوجود مفهومه من أعرف الأشياء وكنهه في غاية الخفاء. Okay, so the concept of being is the most known concept. We all know what it means when something exists or it doesn't exist. Even a child knows. If a child, if you tell a child, go to the other room and your toy is there. And if they go there and if they don't find their toy, they're going to be very angry at you. They know what it means when you say something exists or doesn't exist. It's there or it's not there. Even a child knows that. The concept is very simple. But what is the reality of this thing we call existence? It is utterly hidden, unknown. كنه في غاية الخفاء. Very difficult to know what it is. We actually don't know what it is. We'll talk a lot more about that as we go along. But for now, the concept is very simple to understand when we say something exists. Okay. All right, so we've gone a little bit more deep into, the mumkin and the wajib, and now we've talked a lot about the mahiyya, these definitions, these concepts, and wujud itself. Okay, so now we will go into about wajib al-wujud in a bit more detail. Okay. What is the nature of this wajib al-wujud? What can we say about it? All right. And how is it different from the mumkin? All right. So we said that by definition, wajib al-wujud, the necessary being, is independent. Right? It doesn't depend on anything else for its existence. Its existence is self-sufficient. Right? So it's independent. We said the mumkin is dependent on a cause to make it exist, right? So the wajib is the opposite of that. It is independent. It does not depend on anything else to bring it into existence, okay? Now the question we can ask is why, right? Why is the wajib independent like this? And it's a very simple answer, but it's very deep. And the answer to why is that because its very essence is wujud. Okay? So it's not just this thing that has existence. Okay? Its essence is existence, right? So when we said, the essence of the mumkin was its mahiyya, and that mahiyya did not include wujud, it didn't include existence in the definition. The wajib is the opposite. The wajib, unlike the mumkin, whose essence is something other than being, the essence of the wajib is wujud itself. Okay? So it is wajib al-wujud bidhat, meaning that its essence is wujud. All right. Now, the other thing about it is that we said that everything has a mahiyya, right? We answered the question, what is it? That's the mahiyya of anything, whether it's a pen or a phone or a table or a chair. What is the mahiyya of the wajib al-wujud? Well, the here is opposite again. It doesn't have a mahiyya, okay? So, la mahiyya lil wajib al-wujud. Another way of explaining that, you could say, if you want to, there's some technicalities around it, but you could say that the mahiyya of wajib al-wujud, right, its quiddity, what is it? Its mahiyya is wujud. Okay? It is existence. That's what it is. It is existence. Unlike everything else, right? If I ask you, what is this? You say it's a pen. It's not existence. It's a pen. I ask you, what is this? You say it's a phone. The definition of it is not existence. It's a phone. If you ask me, what is the wajib al-wujud? I tell you, it is wujud. Its essence is wujud. Okay? That's the basic idea. Now, what other characteristics can we conclude about it logically? is that it must be simple. Okay. Simple, which in Arabic is basit, means that it's non-compound. Okay, it's not made of parts. Okay, it's not a combination of things that exist together, and that's the wajib al-wujud. No, that's impossible. Okay, the reason is that this compound entities are dependent on their parts. Right? Any compound entity, right? This phone has a bunch of parts to it. If you don't have those parts, you don't have the phone, right? Same with this pen. It has parts to it. I can take it apart. I can remove different parts of the pen, and it's no longer a full pen. It's dependent on its parts, okay? And this is one of the characteristics of a mumkin al-wujud. Mumkin al-wujud has parts. So the wajib cannot be like that. Right? The wajib is basit. It's simply just one reality. It's غير murakkab. It's a very important requirement, because otherwise it wouldn't be self-sufficient. It would be dependent on its parts. And you can see, or it's logical why that's going to create problems. If its parts start to change or fall apart, then it will not exist. And so it's dependent. So it must not be like that. It must be basit, غير مركب, simple, non-compound. Okay. So what is the essence of wajib al-wujud? It is simply being. It's nothing else, right? There's no additional things to make up a definition of what it is. Its definition is simply pure being and nothing else. All right. So we can now compare these two things in a bit more detail. We can say that the mumkin al-wujud, any contingent entity, when it exists, it is the combination of a quiddity and being. Right? So it is a mahiyya. The mumkin is a mahiyya plus wujud. Right? So you take this pen, it exists. So we know that, its mahiyya is, an instrument used for writing. And we know that it exists. So there must have been a cause that gave it existence. So it has existence and it has a mahiyya, a specific mahiyya, right? That's a mumkin al-wujud. When it exists, it has these two things, okay? Wujud and mahiyya. Whereas wajib al-wujud is not like that, right? Wajib al-wujud is just wujud. Just with wujud, without anything else, without any limits, without any boundaries. And it is simple, without any components or parts, simple, pure wujud. So a few ways that we say that in Arabic is wujudun baht, just wujud, pure being, all right, nothing else. It is basit, as we said earlier. It is also absolute, okay? It is the maximum wujud. It's infinite wujud. It is sirfun fi nafsihi, all right? Pure, absolute being. And so that's what we can say about the essence of the wajib, okay, from the point of view of wujud. It is pure being. And now, hopefully, you start to see how the concepts come together, okay? In a way, this is a bad example, but I'll just use it. It might help to explain it, okay? It's like as though you have empty glasses, okay? Imagine everything in the universe, every mumkin, everything, okay, is an empty glass, okay? It's just an empty glass. When the glass is empty, it doesn't really exist. It's just not there, okay? That's part of the example, which is not very clear, but just stay with me. Now, let's take water, okay? And say that wujud is like water, all right? that wujud can be added to the glass, and then the glass has water in it, and it exists. Okay, so when a glass has water in it, it exists. When it's empty, it doesn't exist. Kind of think of it like that. Whereas water just exists. It doesn't need a glass to exist. It doesn't need anything else to exist. So when you add wujud to the mumkin, it exists. If you take water out of the glass, it's as though you make the mumkin not exist, right? And the water is like the wujud. The water itself exists independent of everything else. It's a bad analogy. It's not a very good one, but I'm just trying to give you an idea of when we say that the mumkin needs a cause, it needs to be given existence, right? Whereas the wajib doesn't need to be given existence because it is wujud itself. Okay. Okay, so that's one key part of what I wanted to share today on wajib wujud and mumkin and mahiyya and so on. There's one last thing I want to add, which is I'll touch on it briefly because it's very simple to understand and it's a logical follow on from what we talked about before when we were talking about physics. And that is to do with the design argument. Okay, now let me just share this slide with you. Okay. Now, I want to just kind of jog your memories and remind you that when we talked about modern physics, we said that these laws of physics are comprehensible, right? We said that the order and fine-tuning in the universe is comprehensible to rational minds, right? So we can understand the universe, we can understand these laws, and those laws existed before even the existence of the universe, right? They existed before space and time and matter and energy. They're like these mathematical, abstract, conceptual, logical laws. And so a very sophisticated level of consciousness and intelligence is needed even just to discover these laws and to understand them and to appreciate them, right? So that's what we discussed before when it came to physics, okay? So here, the philosophical argument that we're going to make, which is called the design argument sometimes, is that is the following, right? If a sophisticated level of consciousness and intelligence is needed to discover and comprehend these abstract mathematical laws, right? Consciousness and intelligence in like human beings, then it is highly indicative that the source of those laws, which is the wajib al-wujud, is also highly conscious and intelligent as well, right? So the laws of physics and laws of physics that we've discovered are giving us some hints, some indications about the nature of the wajib, right? They're adding another aspect to our understanding of it. And on the right, we discussed about them before, but Paul Davies, for example, very well-renowned physicist, he says, look, there must be an unchanging rational ground in which the logical, orderly nature of the universe is rooted, okay? So there's a rational basis for it. And if you remember, we talked about Alexander Vilenkin, famous physicist, and he said, look, when we think about, before the Big Bang happened, in the absence of space, time, and matters, what tablets, in what form could these laws of physics be written, right? The laws are expressed in the form of mathematical equations. Now, here's the important question he asks. He says, if the medium of mathematics is the mind, does this mean that mind should predate the universe, right? And that's all I'm saying here. I'm just saying that because these laws are mathematical, conceptual, you need a mind to understand them, then the source of that, which is that wajib al-wujud, must have, in some way, must have this kind of conscious intelligence to it. Okay, it's another aspect of this wajib that I wanted to bring together from everything that we've talked about so far. Okay, so just adding another aspect to, what can we learn about this wajib al-wujud? We understood that it is wujud itself, but in some way it must also have consciousness to it. I'm not going to say it's a mind, because that's a human thing, that we need a mind in order to understand concepts. It doesn't have to be like a human mind, but there must be some form of intelligence or consciousness as part of that source. So otherwise it doesn't make sense. Why would the laws require intelligence to understand them and not need them as part of its source? Okay, so we conclude there for today with these two things that I told you. As we go forward, will continue to be the focus of our discussions: existence or being and consciousness. Okay, and we'll pick up much more of that in the next part of the roadmap, but I want to start to introduce it from here, that from the laws of physics we can start to see some hints that there is consciousness even at the source of the universe, as expressed in these laws of physics that we've discovered. Okay, so another heavy session with a lot of concepts there. Apologies for that. I will use the next session again to review some of these things, and we'll hopefully have questions that you have, and we can discuss more. But I'll stop there for today. Okay, thank you.